So I tend to be the kind of person who likes to, whatever I do, be doing it with my friends. But I have done solo travel before, which I know certainly isn't for everybody, but I really enjoyed. So traveling through Nepal, I went for travel through there for a week on my own, and yeah, it was just an amazing experience. Yeah.
Are we talking backpacking or more just?
So the time that I went there, I specifically went there to visit the hospitals.
Oh.
At this stage, I was still a trainee, but I was looking into what kind of work I could do once I became a specialist in terms of working overseas to help developing countries and that sort of thing.
So is this you would literally contact hospitals and say, hi,
Yeah, so I found out that there was some expat Aussies who were doctors working in Nepal. So I just emailed them and said, hello, this is who I am, and do you mind if I come visit you? So I went to Kathmandu, visited the doctor there, and I also went to a smaller southern city called Dharan and went and visited a doctor there as well. Yeah.
Wow. So is that something that you'd still consider doing?
Yeah. It's now that I'm a specialist, I obviously have more options because when you want to do things like that, going overseas and things, they generally want you to be an autonomous doctor, if you know what I mean. That's how you're most valuable in terms of your skill set. But obviously, you know, it's a big cost because you actually have to be away from Sydney, and you know, if you're starting family and all that sort of stuff, things to consider there. But it is certainly something I'm still very interested in.
Wow! And what was your what are the hospitals like there over there?
So while I was there was a cholera outbreak, like there is every year. So in terms of the hospitals, the systems can be very similar, but Nepal is a developing country. Their health system is like most countries around the world, where if you can't pay, you can't get any services. So having done all my training and for most of my remembered life growing up in Australia, we're very privileged here to not only have like a standard of living that's pretty high, but also a healthcare service where you generally don't have to worry about how much anything costs. But there I got to see amazing sorts of stuff where basically the doctor will look at you, decide what you need, write it down on a piece of paper, and then you have to go over and pay for it.
No matter what your state.
So
you could be dying.
Yes, and it doesn't matter. And it's just an accepted part of life.
So what if you're not conscious or anything like that?
So if your family can't pay for it, you don't get it.
So if you don't have a representative of any means, you're not going to be treated on.
No one is going to preemptively do anything for you.
As opposed to in Sydney, to clarify for those who are listening, we have a Medicare system where now correct me if I'm wrong, any sort of life-threatening injury, if you're taken to hospital, they will treat you.
Yeah. And
it's covered by the government-funded Medicare system.
So basically as an Australian citizen, you're covered by Medicare for, you know, pretty much any health, non-elective health costs. So, you know, if you want plastic surgery, that's a whole other issue.
Right.
But, you know, as a doctor in Australia, have never had to learn the cost of any of the things that I prescribe because the hospital will pay for it. But I've talked to doctors who've worked overseas who are literally like, well, you know, this is a medicine that you could have, but it costs this much money.
That's tough.
Yeah. It was a very eye-opening experience.
Did you actually practice when you were in Nepal, or was it just
no, because I was only there for such a short period of time. I didn't have time to sort of get cleared to practice there.
Now, this is interesting. Now, we're in the play section, and somehow we've managed to come back to medicine.
Oh, we've managed to come back to medicine.
Now, I think that's a good sign. So, obviously, you're passionate about your work, which I think if you are doing work that you're passionate about, then really there's not really much I can't think of a better spot that you can be from a work perspective. So that's actually really cool.
I gotta say though, traveling in Nepal in itself, because it's the first time I'd ever traveled by myself, and you know, not to be naive, being a woman traveling on your own anywhere is, you know, always a bit more dangerous than being a man traveling alone anywhere. But it was fantastic learning experience of my own, because I don't speak Nepalese.
And there's not a lot of English over there, I assume.
No, and I have to say the best experience of my life has to be sitting in a cafe in Nepal, waiting to meet the doctor person who I knew there, and having the waiter come up. And I cannot speak to anybody on the streets because they don't speak English, they don't speak Nepalese. But the cafe that I was at was staffed by, because it was a charity-run cafe, purely by deaf people who sign.
Oh.
And I, just out of interest, had learnt sign language.
Yes.
So Australian Sign Language, which is based on the British system. And Nepalese Sign Language is also based on the British system. So I was able to communicate with the waiter in sign, even though I couldn't talk to anyone in the country. And it was just amazing, yeah.
Of course, yeah, I forgot to ask you about that, because I do remember. And you were fluent in sign language?
Certainly not 100% fluent, but I could have a conversation.
Wow.
So I was able, you know, I ordered a Coke and I signed thank you to him, and he noticed that I was actually signing it rather than saying it. So we started a conversation. He said, "Are you deaf?" And I went, "No." And you know, I'm from Australia. I'm visiting, and you know, I actually didn't remember the sign for Korea because I'm of Korean heritage.
Okay.
And he had asked. So together, by talking to each other, he taught me the sign for Korea, and like, yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
Wow. Do you still use your sign language?
Oh, certainly not as much as I'd like to. I still remember a bit. So occasionally we've had deaf patients come into the department, and I've been able to help out a bit there. Yeah.
Wow. Actually, I have contemplated learning sign language because one of my uncles is deaf.
Fantastic.
I too, being of Korean background, in Korea, the sign language is different. I thought it was an international standard, but English has their own. You got your British system. Does American have their?
Yeah, so American is completely different to the British system. So there's mainly a one-handed sign language, whereas British is a two-handed sign language.
And when I found that, I got very frustrated internally, and then I just sort of gave up, because I'm like, if it was a universal thing, then I probably would have been all over it.
But as with any other language, it's just developed all separately.
Right.
And so they'll have deaf conventions where deaf people from all over the world will come, and they will need interpreters.
That'd be really cool to see, actually.
It is. It's amazing.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. That's fantastic. What got you into learning sign?
There was a school that had a deaf community in it. I think in Parramatta or somewhere. And every time I caught the train home, I would see them signing with each other. And this was in high school.
Yes.
And I just thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yes, because we caught the same train.
Yeah.
Yes. And I do recall. And that's what triggered your curiosity.
And it just brought me back to it when I was doing med school, and I just wanted to do something that was just not medicine as a point of interest. And for some reason, I ended up doing that. And actually, when I was learning the course, a lot of people were learning sign language because they work at a school where there are deaf kids or something. Whereas I had absolutely no connection. Everyone was like, "Why are you doing this?"
Wow. So, but obviously there had to be an objective. You saw yourself as potentially wanting to help deaf people?
Yeah, I think basically these are people who are living, who are fully Australian, in whatever way that you want to define that, but are completely cut off from the health system, because trying to get a sign language interpreter at night is actually impossible, because usually interpreters during the night are telephone interpreters, and you can't use that for a deaf person.
Of course, yeah. Wow. So obviously, at a very early age, you were actively pursuing something to help others.
I mean, I've liked languages.
Yes.
In high school I did Japanese and as one of my chosen subjects and that sort of thing. So I think it was just seemed interesting that there is actually a language that is native to Australia that I'd never learnt.
Wow, there you go. Wow, that's really good that you brought up. But that is that Nepalese deaf conversation stories. How good that would have been.
It was really amazing.
Really
I actually was sitting there kind of pinching myself. Thinking, is this really happening?
Wow. Yeah. And of course the waiter would have just been absolutely...
Yeah, because the Nepalese population is varied in having more Indian sort of background to Asian sort of background. So there were plenty of people who sort of looked like me, who were Nepalese.
Oh.
But it was obvious from, the fact that I had my suitcase and the way I was dressed and stuff that I was a visitor. And for them to be able to communicate with a visitor was unusual. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. Beautiful story.